And thank you for attending and for your commitment to taking the tough decisions that will give us a chance for an equitable and sustainable future. This is, of course, Jane Jacobs, a keen observer of all things urban and political. Her fears for our trajectory as a society, as expressed in Dark Age Ahead, can hopefully be avoided. As expressed by Ursula Franklin regarding Jane and citizen politics, the final value of any idea lies in those actions towards human betterment that the idea has stimulated. I'd like to talk to you about the development recipe and the cooks in the kitchen. We can't keep whipping up the same cakes, albeit changing the icing, serving them onto the council plate, inviting their approval and consumption, and calling the result a sustainable future. We can't even call it community, except as a sales slogan. This address will explore some pressing and present problems in our planning and decision-making framework that stand in the way of a truly sustainable future for our communities, our watersheds, and our planet. Hopefully, the presentation will end on a hopeful note. Are we agreed that it's critical for planet, watershed, communities, and our well-being, both as citizens and as stewards, that growth without fundamental change is not the way forward? I'm not so sure. We have both much and little. Much pertains to the icing, little to the cake, the appearance of things rather than their substance and interrelation. There has to be space for action, a place where fundamental changes to the cooks and their recipes give us hope for different results, better patterns, and better habits. Let's look a little more closely. Cake. The win-win, so beloved of those that have, and failing to deliver for those who have not. Win-win can be a trapdoor used to relieve pressures which demand changes in our present behavior. It can offer more rather than better. It offers solutions that actually reinforce present behavior, free of consequence. This is not a recipe for a finite planet and for limited economic resources. Here's an example of a win-win that I think illustrates the problem. Active transportation infrastructure. Our central and major streets are unsafe for children, walking and cycling. And the solution might be to make active transportation. However, even though we know it's a key component of a sustainable future, we might look at it just a little bit through the wrong lens. A potential win-win is to create distinct infrastructure for walking and cycling, a new and separate trail system. The solution removes the cyclist and pedestrian from the streetscape and abandons it to the vehicle, even if that vehicle is electric. Don't get me wrong, trail amenities are a benefit, but I think this win-win has some flaws. Can we or our environment afford the investment and external costs of change which perpetuates the dominance of the vehicle? Can we afford to add rather than improve? Streets without children, pedestrians, and cyclists are poorer for it. They, not the car, drive relationships which support quality. They bring the interaction necessary for common understanding among diverse citizens and promote placemaking over car parking. Without pedestrians and cyclists in the streetscape, there is little need for shade and greenery, and no one for the ground floors to play with. The parallel solution perpetuates the single use and design by separation tactics that have informed the planning and making of our communities since the 1950s. Same cooks and recipes, another infrastructure. The win-win I've described provides the appearance of change, but proposes more rather than better. It is, however, palatable and comfortable because it abandons rather than challenges. This is, of course, the recently rebuilt Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C. The real win is to redesign the street as a complete and safe space that can be enjoyed by all, accepting the vehicle on more level terms with real gains in equity and sustainability. The solution recognizes where we have to head, with active transportation not as recreation, but as the principal mode of living. Can we avoid the consequences we have planned for ourselves? We need a new framework for decisions, and we need it quickly. We need solutions of integration, of harmony, ones that grow from our forward-thinking First Nations. The Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash, their sustainable relationship to one another, to the land, and to its peoples, is a great example of the integrated design and strength from diversity that can replace winning with balance. I think the way forward means committing to design based on principle. This graphic illustrates our studio's approach. Not the making of things, but as the fostering of sustainable relationships. Not compromise, but as the balance which is the whole. Not an aesthetic veneer of excellence, the icing on the cake, if you will, but as inclusive of diversity at its heart. Design for separate pieces of the pie produces efficiency within the parts and works from personal rather than public principles. It ignores valid interests and the necessary balance of the whole by definition. This is the real missing middle. Over there, not here. Not now, later. Not me, them. The reason we can't do this is, well, or you're missing the larger picture. But whose picture are we talking about? Let's look at one slice of that pie, which dominates the present planning paradigm, the particular and addictive interest that builds our communities and future. At each stage in the development process, the mirage on the horizon is a wholesome and balanced vision of community. Let's call that our official plan. But that common future is to be attained through sequential transaction and application of private interest in pursuit of highest and best use. Its wildly imbalanced outcome is locked in from the get-go, as developer pays out the last harvest, whether for farmland or a piece of the community's heart. At each step, maximum becomes minimum until final sale to investor. And even then, the product is viewed as investment, as retirement savings, what have you. It's a landscape of investment, not a community. The landscape requires massive operating subsidy, a constant injection of energy and resources, and fuels separation and more rather than integration and better. It's no way to tackle a climate emergency. This graph shows the trajectory of land values in Kitchener's urban growth area from 2012 to 2020, about $5 million an acre during that period. Now suddenly, we are at 25 million. The last harvest for several longtime property owners, and pretty much a guarantee that land in the downtown and across its boundary can only be developed as a monoculture of towers, 30 stories or more. Our public investment in LRT has created this windfall for some. We will pay once again through our increased housing cost as a result of these land values, again as these forms of development exclude diversity of household and income, and again as we forfeit the opportunity within our major transit station areas for mid-rise, mixed-use alternatives to raising our children in car-dependent, single-family detached suburban dwellings. The hidden costs of that other pole of imbalance, the monoculture of suburban tract housing, has been well chronicled, including by Ontario's own Pamela Blett. In Perverse Cities, she details how our development charges, property tax system, municipal budgets, and many other aspects of this fiscal landscape subsidize suburban growth, and add to the appeal of its lifestyle. It's a difficult read, but if we are to change, we need to pay attention to how we pay as well as how we plan. Jane is best known for her 1961 critique of urban planning policy, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, a critique that has unfortunately held true for going on half a century. Less well-known, but equally powerful, is her Systems of Survival, in which she sets out two moral syndromes that shape our political and social actions. Although she argues that the commercial and guardian syndromes are a necessary and productive pair, she cautions against their misapplication and perversion. The effects are particularly pernicious when behavior appropriate to one context infiltrates the other, a sort of monstrous hybrid. Let's look at decision-making using Jane's syndromes and the triumph of the particular over the principle, of self-interest over official plan, as supported by architects and planners. These professions wear many hats and sometimes disguises. To borrow from Groucho Marx, those are my principles, and if you don't like them, well, I have others. Good planning, those magical two words that bless every approval. The municipal planner, a long-term planner and a professional, has created an official plan which meets provincial targets for density and growth, abides by policy statements, and most importantly, has input from both citizens and the development community. It spawns and is supported by neighborhood plans, zoning bylaws that also meet the targets, guidelines and studies to support the principles of the vision. A vision, yes, but it's conveniently sclerotic. The lag of zoning and the particulars of the rules in terms of implementation means that the official plan cannot be anything other than principle. It lacks implementation measures and can be exploited. There's a disconnect between the principles and the particulars. This is good planning. The developer's consulting planner, a professional planner, creates a development proposal which exceeds upper tier targets for density with vastly different density to the official plan, requiring order of magnitude revisions to the neighborhood plans and zoning bylaws. It is replete with justification reports that cite the same upper tier documents used by the municipality's professional planner to create the official plan. It selects from studies and guidelines while simultaneously arguing their inoperability, and it reaches very different conclusions. This too is good planning. The municipality's file planner creates a report on the development proposal, again citing the same documents, acknowledging public input and concern, but arguing for the bigger picture and a reasonable compromise. Often, the report before council repeats arguments put forward by the developer's professional planner in support of the application, and in the end, provides a recommendation for approval. This is also good planning. So if all of this is good planning, and all of it has been prepared by professional planners, but isn't consistent as the planner moves back and forth between the moral syndromes Ms. Jacobs feels must be kept separate, then I've got to ask, what do planners profess? Well, we've done cakes and pies, maybe tarts this time. The Planning Act mandates a public meeting where interested citizens and decision-making councillors are presented for the first time with this appetizing plate of confections, each similarly shaped but of distinct taste. The cooks have been hard at work in the kitchens to look at this development, sometimes for years before the public gets a look at it. There is very real confusion at work here, and it drives the public and some decision makers absolutely mad. What to believe and how to decide. What happened to the official plan? I'd like to offer some clarity, if I may. Let's look at some fundamentals. Certain professions are self-regulating in accordance with specific legislation. That legislation carves out territory within which only the professional may practice. The territory is made the exclusive domain of the professional in trust, with duties to fulfill. These duties are often broadly and sometimes vaguely defined as acting in the public interest. This is often misconstrued as a profession of expertise or ability or knowledge, although these are important. Fundamentally, though, what distinguishes the professions is adherence to a set of values in the face of pressures from other interests. And I should note the duty to public interest to which the professional must adhere might be more narrow and self-interested than the public or municipal politicians understand. Planning has a similar aura, but is not an exclusively self-regulated profession in Ontario. It is somewhat supported by the Ontario Professional Planners Institute Act of 1994. So let's look a little bit at various models to which the architect or the planner might adhere. Is the planner an altruist? That's an identity in line with public perception of professional duty and obligation to the public interest. It's a duty unswayed by the planner's position in the process, whether within the municipality or within the private sector, or the funding of their activity. How are they paid? In this model, the three planners, the development planner, the official plan planner, the private consulting planner, would each agree, or at least have an opinion within the same ballpark, regarding the approval process and what would constitute good planning for the project. The planner could also be a visionary. In the tradition of Robert Moses and post-war planners, a kind of keeper of grand vision of the physical realm for the community and organizing capital to accomplish that vision. Sometimes that vision includes ideas of social order and justice. Sometimes it does not. That model looks at the planner or professional as unswayed by inexpert or unqualified opinion. In this model, the planner is simply right. The planner as advocate. This is similar to the legal profession, where the lawyer plays a positive role in the justice system through advocacy for the client. However, this model depends on the skilled presentation of the opposing view in a public forum. The model then relies upon decision by Solomonic judge, the either this or that of the case, with winner take all. Given that development approval rests with a political council, this sets a high bar for political leadership, councillors' technical knowledge of planning minutiae, BS detection skills, and their ability to resist the sway of private interest. Planner as facilitator. In this model, the planner is responsible only for refereeing the forum of debate and reporting on the results to the decision maker. The planner provides mediation between capital and society with guidance from values by others, often the decision-making councillors themselves. This model relies in the belief that process is the way to accomplish the public interest, rather than through applying principles. The developer's case is possibly made more palatable or in some ways balanced by the input of the general public. The planner isn't really responsible except as a broker of compromise, and then the politician decides on the merits of the deal. What to do? So here we're back to the public meeting. It's a theatrical scene we know well. An advocate planner addresses council disguised as an altruist, carefully sifting the heaps of policy and plans to select the particulars which bolster the case for a public approval of private self-interest. The municipal planner reports on the results of their facilitation without redressing the balance by opposing argument. The visionary planners authors of the official plan, are viewing from the balcony. It's left to the public to rush the stage at the last minute using what arms they can muster. But they brought knives to a gunfight. Councillors are free to follow their inclination to saw things down the middle, and the principles which are meant to govern over the particulars have little or no standing. Is this farce or tragedy? Perhaps the planners, like the architects, simply disagree. Each may bring fundamentally different perspectives and values to their work as professionals, and each finds their place within the public and private sector in order to apply those principles and their working knowledge of what the public interest might entail. It seems to me that a first reasonable step is to acknowledge the many perspectives and forms of input as to good planning, and not to disguise one with the voice of the other in that forum of debate. We should insist that all aspects of the vision are present in the particular project, as well as the infrastructure of the whole. Ken Greenberg has made this point this morning. One example, Toronto's study, Growing Up, Planning for Children in New Vertical Communities, has meant that there is this insistence now that a tower project actually has to cater and plan for the idea that children could potentially grow up in this structure. We are seeing in outerlying mid-sized municipalities now the potential effects of Toronto's stiffening up. We are seeing development move into our major transit station areas that does the same old without planning for children, without planning for how we are going to realize this urban vision. We need to abandon planning and implementation through separation and branded lifestyle. Put simply, we have to go away from the monoculture crop and harvest model in favor of integrated development that removes the need for sprawl, commuting, and movement. We need to direct infrastructural and investment spending to support diverse and sustainable neighborhoods that meet targets more evenly rather than in the tower and single-family dwelling model. We need to reward human scale and existing context. We need to distinguish between advocacy and altruism in planning and design. Let's ensure the former is balanced by equally informed and expert rebuttal. Let's craft the solutions from the latter while recognizing the important role of risk-taking and innovation. And above all, help us to understand that the bill is accruing, rendered by planet and community, as we subsidize present patterns and habits. Let's create a political climate where new habits are possible. Let's learn from our First Nations and their generation's perspective on decision-making that spans 7 generations. Thanks kindly.
Thank you so much. So today I'm going to relaunch a poll. So I'm just going to, oops, not that one. So a little bit of that. So we're going to relaunch this poll and get you guys now to try again with the question, acting as students of our environment, I will, and you can do multiple answers if you want. So again, what we're hoping to do with this is actually get you to click on something to show that you're invested and interested and involved, to show that you are going to take action after this conference. Our goal for this conference isn't to just provide you with a massive amount of research and resources and data and connections, but it's also, you know, a time where you can reflect on the next steps. And that's why we've asked at the beginning of this conference is that you sit down with your pen and paper and you're reflecting during these sessions. It's very fast paced. It can be a bit overwhelming. So writing your thoughts down and thinking about next steps, I think is very important to ensure that after this conference is done, there's something forward. There's movement moving forward. But thank you so much. So I'm going to stop the poll right now. Okay, and I'll share the result. So it looks like we're pretty even with all the results, supporting your community leaders who propose, implement change, proposing designs from community development. Not too sure if you would like to respond to some of these poll results or explain a bit more what you're thinking.
Sorry, that question's for me?
Yes, sorry about that.
I was looking in the chat.
Yeah, so you should be, the poll results should pop. Actually, you're co-host, so you don't see it maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess your questions, it was, supporting community leaders who propose and implement change, which move toward long-term sustainability for all, propose designs for community and development that integrate principles of long-term sustainability, and then agree that comprehensive integrative long-term planning is achieved through official plan. So what were you trying to get at? Why did you think that these questions were important?
Well, I think one of the fundamental keys to approvals comes from the argument that unless we approve this project and it's either extremely low density or its tower, we are not going to meet the guidelines. We're not going to meet the official plan. We're not going to meet the provincial policy statements. And the planners and municipal politicians seem somewhat reluctant to agree, or at least to acknowledge, that the present official plans, and certainly I think this is the case in our city of Kitchener, already meet these targets. And there is no driving necessity for the 30 or the 40 or the 50-story tower in order to meet the target. And of course, what this has done, the approval of that level of tower, has driven the land pricing to such where the first transaction means that we've got to have that tower. And now we're not able to realize in and around the major transit station areas any kind of mid-rise mixed-use community development, which Ken showed numerous examples of this morning. So what I was trying to get at was, can we strengthen the idea of just following the plan? But in order to do that, we've got to make decisions on principle and not argue over the rules at the lower levels. And unfortunately, lower levels in zoning and the picayune details of the rezoning process are where things end up.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Amy.